I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Patricia Sullivan standing at my front door with that clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. The president of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA had that particular look on her face, the one that said she was about to make someone's day significantly worse. And today, that someone was apparently me. "Nathan Montgomery, I need to speak with you about a very serious matter," she said before I even had the door fully open. It was 7:30 on a Saturday morning in Phoenix, Arizona, and I had been looking forward to sleeping in after a brutal week at my job as a software engineer. "Can this wait, Patricia? It's the weekend." "No, it cannot wait. This is about your storage facility." I blinked at her through the morning sunlight. "My storage facility? You mean the one on my property, the one that violates multiple HOA covenants, yes." She flipped through papers on her clipboard with practiced efficiency. "I've documented 17 separate violations over the past month, and I'm here to inform you that the board has voted to take immediate action." I stepped out onto my front porch, suddenly very awake. "Patricia, that storage building has been there since before I bought this house 3 years ago. You approved it during the initial inspection." "We have no record of any such approval," she said, her voice taking on that sing-song quality that people use when they think they're being reasonable but are actually being insufferable. "And even if we did, new board members can revisit previous decisions that were made in error." The storage facility she was talking about was a 12 by 16-foot metal building that sat on the back corner of my half-acre lot. The previous owner had built it with proper permits from the city, and it housed my woodworking equipment, tools, lawn care machinery, and various other items that wouldn't fit in my garage. It was painted to match my house, well-maintained, and completely invisible from the street. "What exactly do you want me to do about it?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. Patricia's thin lips stretched into what might have been intended as a smile. "The board is requiring you to provide us with a full set of keys to the facility so we can conduct a proper inspection. We need to document the contents and ensure that nothing stored within violates any fire codes, environmental regulations, or HOA guidelines." I stared at her for a long moment. "You want keys to my private storage building? For inspection purposes, yes. And if I refuse, then we'll be forced to pursue legal action and begin levying fines of $250 per day until compliance is achieved." She said this as casually as if she were discussing the weather. I felt my jaw tighten. "Patricia, you don't have any legal right to access my private property. That building is well within my property lines and it's my personal space. Everything within the Meadowbrook Heights community is subject to HOA oversight, Nathan. You agreed to that when you purchased your home. The covenants, conditions, and restrictions are very clear on this matter." "Show me," I said. "Show me exactly where in the CCRs it says you have the right to enter private storage facilities on homeowner property." She pulled out a plastic sheeted document from her clipboard. "Section 12, Paragraph 4, Subsection B clearly states that all structures visible from any adjacent property must be accessible for HOA inspection upon reasonable notice. We're giving you that notice now." I took the paper from her and read through it. The section she referenced talked about maintaining properties and structures in good repair, but there was nothing that explicitly gave them the right to demand keys and access private spaces. The wording was vague enough that I could see how someone might interpret it that way if they really wanted to, but it certainly wasn't clear-cut. "This doesn't say what you think it says, Patricia. The board disagrees with your interpretation. We need those keys by Monday morning or the fines begin. Have a good weekend, Nathan." She turned and walked back down my driveway to her white Mercedes SUV, leaving me standing there in my pajama pants and Phoenix Suns t-shirt, wondering what the hell had just happened. I went back inside and made coffee, then spent the next hour reading through every single page of the HOA documents I had received when I bought the house. The more I read, the more convinced I became that Patricia and her board were overreaching their authority. Yes, the HOA had the right to inspect the exterior of structures. Yes, they could require that buildings be maintained. No, they absolutely did not have the right to demand keys to private spaces and rummage through my personal belongings. By Monday morning, I had contacted 3 different attorneys who specialized in property law. The first 2 were booked solid and couldn't see me for weeks. The third, a woman named Sarah Chen who had an office in downtown Phoenix, agreed to meet with me that afternoon. Sarah's office was on the 14th floor of a glass building with a view of Camelback Mountain. She was in her mid-40s, sharply dressed in a navy suit, and had the kind of direct manner that made me trust her immediately. "So your HOA wants keys to your storage building," she said after I had explained the situation. "That's a new one, though I can't say I'm entirely surprised. HOAs have been getting increasingly aggressive about their perceived authority. Can they actually do this?" She leaned back in her chair and tapped her pen against her notepad. "The short answer is no. The longer answer is that it depends on the specific language in your covenants, but from what you've told me and what I'm seeing in these documents, they're absolutely overstepping. Section 12 doesn't grant them access to private interior spaces. It talks about exterior maintenance and appearance standards. That's what I thought. The bigger issue here is that they are essentially demanding to search your private property without any real cause. Even if the HOA agreement gave them some limited inspection rights, which this one doesn't, they couldn't exercise those rights in a way that violates your fundamental property rights or privacy. "So what do I do?" Sarah smiled. "We send them a letter. A very clear, very firm letter explaining exactly why they're wrong and what will happen if they continue down this path. Most HOAs will back off once they realize they're facing actual legal pushback. They're used to homeowners rolling over because fighting seems too expensive or time-consuming. And if they don't back off, then we take further action. But let's start with the letter and see what happens." I authorized Sarah to send the letter and left her office feeling better than I had all weekend. That relief lasted exactly 2 days, until I came home from work on Wednesday to find a bright orange notice stapled to my front door. The notice, signed by Patricia Sullivan in her capacity as HOA president, informed me that I had failed to comply with the board's directive. Effective immediately, I was being fined $250 per day. Additionally, the HOA was asserting a lien against my property for the amount of these fines, which would continue to accrue until I provided the requested keys. I took a photo of the notice and immediately called Sarah Chen. "They did what?" she said when I explained. "Okay, that's actually good for us. They're escalating without any legal basis, which means we can take this to court and ask for attorney's fees when we win. How fast can this happen?" "I'll file an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order tomorrow. We'll argue that the HOA is engaged in illegal harassment and attempting to violate your property rights. The fines are also problematic because they haven't followed their own procedures for dispute resolution." There are procedures. There are always procedures. Look at Section 23 of your CCRs. Any dispute is supposed to go through mediation before fines can be levied. They've skipped that entirely. The next few days were a blur of legal activity. Sarah filed the motion, and we were given a hearing date for the following Monday. In the meantime, I received 2 more notices from Patricia, each one more threatening than the last. The second one informed me that if I didn't comply by Friday, the HOA would be forced to take additional measures to ensure community safety and compliance. I had no idea what additional measures meant, but I was about to find out. On Friday afternoon, I received a call from my neighbor, Tom Brennan, who lived 3 houses down. "Nathan, you need to get home right now. There are people at your house with bolt cutters." I was in the middle of a meeting at work, but I immediately told my boss there was an emergency and drove home going 20 miles over the speed limit the entire way. When I pulled onto my street, I saw Patricia Sullivan standing in my backyard with 2 men I didn't recognize. One of them was indeed holding a pair of industrial bolt cutters. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted as I ran around the side of my house. Patricia looked up at me with an expression of supreme satisfaction. "You were given multiple opportunities to comply, Nathan. The board has authorized us to secure access to this facility for the safety inspection. You're not cutting my lock. Get off my property right now. This is HOA business and we have every right to be here." "No, you don't. This is trespassing and I'm calling the police." I pulled out my phone, but Patricia didn't even flinch. "Go ahead. We've already contacted them ourselves and explained the situation. They're aware that we're conducting official HOA business." I dialed 911 anyway. The operator who answered took my information and said she was sending an officer. While we waited, Patricia and her 2 companions stood there looking smug, and I stood between them and my storage building, hoping this didn't escalate into something physical. 2 Phoenix PD officers arrived about 15 minutes later. I recognized one of them, Officer David Martinez, from a neighborhood watch meeting we'd had a few months earlier. "What's going on here?" Officer Martinez asked, looking between me and Patricia. We both started talking at once. He held up his hand. "One at a time. Madam, you first." Patricia launched into her explanation about HOA authority and inspection rights and how I was refusing to comply with community rules. She made it sound like I was harboring something dangerous in my storage building, and the HOA was just trying to keep everyone safe. When she finished, Officer Martinez turned to me. "And your side? That building is my private property on my land which I own. She wants keys to it so she can go through my things, but she has no legal right to access it. My attorney has already sent them a letter explaining this, and we have a court hearing on Monday. This is trespassing, and she was about to cut my lock." Officer Martinez looked at Patricia. "Do you have a court order authorizing this inspection?" "We don't need a court order. The HOA covenants give us the authority." "That's disputed, which is why we're going to court," I added. "She's trying to force her way onto my property before a judge can rule on the matter." The officer was quiet for a moment, then said, "Madam, if there's a legal dispute about property rights and access, you can't just force your way in. That could be considered breaking and entering regardless of what you think the HOA rules say. But we're the HOA. We have authority here." "Not without a court order, you don't. Not if the property owner is disputing your interpretation of the rules." Officer Martinez turned to the 2 men with Patricia. "I'm going to need you all to leave this property now." Patricia's face went red. "This is outrageous. The HOA board will be contacting your superiors about this." "You're welcome to do that, madam, but right now I need you to leave. If you don't, I'll have to cite you for trespassing." The 3 of them left, Patricia muttering threats the entire way. Officer Martinez stayed behind for a few minutes to write up a report. "This is going to court on Monday?" he asked me. "That's what my attorney says." "Good. Keep everything documented. Take photos, keep all the notices they've given you, make a timeline. The more evidence you have, the better. He handed me a copy of his report. If they come back before the hearing, call us again. They're not allowed to harass you like this. After he left, I walked around my property taking photos of everything, then emailed them to Sarah Chen along with a detailed account of what had just happened. She responded within an hour. Perfect. This is exactly what we need. They've now committed actual trespass and attempted breaking and entering. I'm amending our motion to include this incident. See you Monday at 9 a.m. Don't worry, we've got this. That weekend was probably the longest of my life. I kept expecting Patricia or her goons to show up again, but my property stayed quiet. I spent most of Saturday in the storage building, making sure everything was organized and documented. I had nothing to hide in there, just tools and equipment and materials for my woodworking hobby, but the principle of the thing made my blood boil. This was my property, my private space, and some busybody HOA president thought she could force her way in just because she felt like it. Monday morning came, and I met Sarah at the Maricopa County Superior Court downtown. The courtroom was one of those modern ones with light wood paneling and ergonomic chairs, nothing like the dark mahogany chambers you see in old movies. Patricia was there with the HOA's attorney, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit who looked bored with the whole proceeding. Judge Robert Palmer presided over the hearing. He was in his 60s, with gray hair and reading glasses that he kept adjusting as he reviewed the documents in front of him. This is a motion for a temporary restraining order against Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, Judge Palmer said. Miss Chen, you represent the plaintiff. Yes, Your Honor. Nathan Montgomery is the homeowner in question, and we're seeking emergency relief from the HOA's illegal attempts to access his private property. I've reviewed your motion and the supporting documents. This is about a storage building. Sarah stood. Yes, Your Honor. The HOA is demanding keys to my client's private storage facility and has threatened him with daily fines of $250. When he refused to surrender his keys, representatives of the HOA, including the president Patricia Sullivan, came onto his property with bolt cutters and attempted to forcibly enter the building. Phoenix police were called and filed a report, which we've included in our exhibits. Judge Palmer looked at the HOA's attorney. Mr. Harrison, what's your position on this? The attorney stood, looking slightly less bored now. Your Honor, the HOA simply wants to conduct a routine safety inspection as authorized by the community's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Mr. Montgomery has refused to cooperate with this reasonable request, which has forced the board to take progressive enforcement measures. Breaking and entering is a progressive enforcement measure, Judge Palmer asked dryly. We were attempting to fulfill our obligations to ensure community safety, Your Honor. The CCRs clearly state that all structures must be accessible for HOA inspection. Let me see these CCRs. Judge Palmer spent several minutes reading through the documents. The courtroom was silent except for the quiet rustle of paper. Finally, he looked up. Mr. Harrison, I'm not seeing where this gives you the right to enter a private storage facility on someone's property. Section 12, Paragraph 4, Subsection B, Your Honor. I'm reading that section right now. It says structures must be maintained in good repair and appearance. It says nothing about the HOA having access to the interior of private buildings. We interpret that section as granting inspection rights, Your Honor. That's an interesting interpretation, Counselor, but not one that appears to be supported by the actual language of the document. Miss Chen, what about the fines? Sarah stood again. The fines are being levied in violation of the HOA's own dispute resolution procedures, Your Honor. Section 23, requires mediation before any fines can be assessed. The HOA has completely bypassed this requirement and gone straight to punitive measures, including placing a lien on my client's property. Judge Palmer looked at Mr. Harrison. Did your client follow the dispute resolution procedures? Your Honor, the board felt that the severity of Mr. Montgomery's non-compliance warranted immediate action. That's not what I asked. Did you follow your own procedures? Mr. Harrison shifted his weight. The board voted to waive the mediation requirement in this case. On what grounds? On the grounds that Mr. Montgomery's refusal to cooperate represented an immediate threat to community safety. What threat? Judge Palmer asked. What specific safety concern does this storage building present? There was a long pause. Mr. Harrison glanced back at Patricia, who was sitting in the gallery behind him looking increasingly uncomfortable. We believe there may be fire hazards or improperly stored materials that could endanger neighboring properties. Do you have any evidence of that? We haven't been able to conduct the inspection, Your Honor. So you're basing this entire enforcement action on speculation. We're basing it on our responsibility to protect the community. Judge Palmer removed his glasses and set them on the bench. Mr. Harrison, I'm going to explain something to you and your client. HOA authority is not unlimited. It's constrained by the actual language of the governing documents and by state law. What I'm seeing here is an HOA that has decided it has far more power than it actually possesses. The CCRs don't grant you access to private interior spaces. They don't allow you to skip your own dispute resolution procedures, and they certainly don't authorize you to show up at someone's property with bolt cutters. Your Honor, I'm not finished. What concerns me most about this case is the aggressive escalation by the HOA. You went from an initial demand to daily fines to attempted forced entry in the space of less than 2 weeks. That's not reasonable enforcement. That's harassment. Patricia stood up in the gallery. Your Honor, if I may, you may not. Sit down, please. Mr. Harrison is representing your organization, and he will speak for you. Patricia sat, her face flushed with anger. Judge Palmer continued. I'm granting the motion for a temporary restraining order. Meadowbrook Heights HOA is prohibited from entering Mr. Montgomery's property or attempting to access his storage facility. The daily fines are suspended pending a full hearing on the merits. The lien is also suspended. Furthermore, I'm ordering both parties to participate in mediation as required by the HOA's own documents. If that mediation fails to resolve this dispute, we'll schedule a full hearing. Your Honor, Sarah said, we're also requesting attorney's fees under Arizona Revised Statutes Section 33, 1808, which allows for fee recovery when an HOA acts unreasonably or in bad faith. I'll take that under advisement pending the outcome of mediation. If the HOA continues on this path, I'll be inclined to grant that request. Anything else? No, Your Honor. Then we're adjourned. The restraining order is effective immediately. We walked out of the courthouse into the Phoenix sunshine, and I felt like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. That went well, Sarah said. Judge Palmer saw right through their nonsense. What happens now? Now we go to mediation. The court will appoint a mediator, probably within the next 2 weeks. We'll sit down with the HOA and a neutral third party and try to work this out. My guess is they'll back off completely once they've had time to absorb what the judge said today. And if they don't, then we go back to court for a full hearing and we ask for attorney's fees and sanctions against the HOA. But I don't think it'll come to that. Patricia Sullivan just got publicly spanked by a judge, and the HOA's attorney now knows he's dealing with a losing case. they'll fold. Sarah was half right. The HOA did back off, but Patricia Sullivan wasn't quite done making my life difficult yet. The mediation was scheduled for 2 weeks later at a conference center in Scottsdale. The mediator was a retired judge named Ellen Foster, who specialized in property and HOA disputes. We all met in a sterile conference room with a long table, uncomfortable chairs, and motivational posters on the walls about cooperation and finding common ground. Patricia brought 3 other board members with her. Dennis Crawford, the vice president, a balding man in his 50s who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Margaret Chen, the treasurer, a stern woman who kept adjusting her pearl necklace. And Robert Dawson, the secretary, a younger guy who couldn't have been older than 35 and seemed mostly interested in his phone. Sarah and I sat on one side of the table. Patricia's crew took the other side with Mr. Harrison, their attorney, at the head. Judge Foster sat at the opposite end, reviewing her notes. "Let's begin," Judge Foster said. "We're here to resolve a dispute about HOA access to a private storage facility on Mr. Montgomery's property. I've reviewed the court documents and the CCRs, and I've read Judge Palmer's ruling on the temporary restraining order. Before we start negotiating, I want each side to briefly explain what they want out of this mediation. Miss Sullivan, let's start with you." Patricia folded her hands on the table. "The HOA wants to ensure that all properties in our community meet our standards for safety and appearance. Mr. Montgomery's storage facility may contain hazardous materials or conditions that could endanger his neighbors. We simply want to conduct a one-time inspection to verify that everything is in compliance with local fire codes and environmental regulations. Mr. Montgomery." "I want them to leave me alone," I said. "My storage building is legal, properly permitted, well-maintained, and full of normal tools and equipment. There's no hazard, no violation, and no legitimate reason for the HOA to demand access to it. They're overstepping their authority, and I want it to stop." Judge Foster nodded. "Miss Sullivan, what specific concerns do you have about the contents of this building?" "We've received complaints from neighbors about noise coming from the property at odd hours. There's been sawdust and wood debris visible in the yard. We're concerned that Mr. Montgomery may be operating some kind of commercial business out of his storage facility, which would violate our CCRs. This was the first I'd heard about any of this." "That's completely false," I said. "I do woodworking as a hobby. I've built furniture for my own house. I'm not running a business, and I've never had any complaints from my neighbors about noise." "We have documentation of the complaints," Patricia said, pulling out a folder. Sarah held out her hand. "May I see that documentation?" Patricia slid the folder across the table. Sarah opened it and spent a minute looking through the pages, then showed them to me. There were 3 complaint forms, each one typed up on official HOA stationery. The first was dated 3 weeks ago and claimed that power tools were being used at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. The second was from 2 weeks ago, complaining about sawdust in my yard. The third was from 10 days ago, alleging that I was loading furniture into a truck at 6 a.m. on a Saturday. "These aren't signed," I said. "There are no names on any of these complaints. We allow anonymous complaints to protect residents from retaliation," Patricia said. Sarah tapped the papers. "These are also conveniently dated after Mr. Montgomery refused to give you his keys. Judge Foster, I'd suggest that these complaints are fabricated as a pretext for the HOA's actions." "That's a serious accusation," Mr. Harrison said. "Then let's investigate it. Mr. Montgomery, do you use power tools at 10 p.m.? "Never. I'm usually in bed by 10. I have to be at work by 8 a.m. "What about the sawdust in your yard?" I clean up whenever I work on a project. I'm not saying a few specks of sawdust have never escaped, but nothing that would warrant a complaint. And I certainly haven't been loading furniture into a truck to sell it. Judge Foster looked at Patricia. Do you have any other evidence of these complaints beyond these forms? The forms are sufficient documentation under our procedures. But they're anonymous and unverifiable. Miss Sullivan, I'm going to be frank with you. This looks like a fishing expedition. You want access to Mr. Montgomery's storage building, and you're using unsubstantiated complaints to justify it. We have every right to ensure compliance with our CCRs. You have the rights that are actually granted by your CCRs, which don't include searching private buildings. Let me propose something. Mr. Montgomery, would you be willing to allow a one-time exterior inspection of your storage facility, just the outside, to verify that it's properly maintained and doesn't present any visible safety issues? I looked at Sarah. She shrugged slightly, leaving it up to me. Fine, I said. They can look at the outside of the building, but no one goes inside and no one touches my lock. Miss Sullivan, Judge Foster asked. Patricia's jaw was tight. That's insufficient. We need to verify the contents. On what basis? You have no evidence of any actual violation. The complaints are anonymous and unverified. They're not evidence of anything. Here's my assessment of this situation. The HOA has no legitimate basis for demanding access to the interior of this storage facility. Mr. Montgomery has been cooperative in allowing an exterior inspection, which is more than he's legally required to do. If you continue to pursue this matter, you're going to lose in court, and you're going to end up paying Mr. Montgomery's attorney's fees. Is that really what the board wants? Dennis Crawford, the vice president, spoke up for the first time. Could I make a suggestion? Patricia shot him a look, but Judge Foster nodded. Please. What if we drop this whole thing? The building looks fine from the outside. We've never had any actual problems with Nathan's property. Maybe we were being overzealous in trying to enforce standards that don't really apply here. I move that we accept the exterior inspection as sufficient and close this matter. Margaret Chen, the treasurer, nodded. I second that. This whole situation has gotten out of hand, and we're spending HOA funds on legal fees for something that seems less and less justified the more we discuss it. Robert Dawson looked up from his phone. Yeah, I agree. Can we just wrap this up? Patricia looked like she'd been slapped. The board voted. The board can vote again, Dennis said. I'm calling for a motion to end this enforcement action against Nathan Montgomery and rescind all fines and liens. All in favor. 3 hands went up. Only Patricia stayed down. Motion passes, Dennis said. Miss Foster, is there anything we need to sign to make this official? Judge Foster smiled. I'll draft a settlement agreement stating that the HOA withdraws all claims and enforcement actions against Mr. Montgomery, that the fines and liens are removed, and that the HOA acknowledges Mr. Montgomery's property rights regarding his storage facility. Both parties will sign it and will file it with the court. Does that work for everyone? Works for me, I said. Fine, Patricia said through gritted teeth. The whole thing took another hour to finalize. We went over the exact language of the agreement, made sure everyone understood what they were signing, and then all put our names on the document. Sarah and I walked out of that conference room with a legally binding settlement that gave me everything I wanted. Congratulations, Sarah said in the parking lot. You just won your case. Thanks to you. What do I owe you? She quoted me a figure that was substantial but fair. I'll send you an invoice. But honestly, Nathan, this was one of the more satisfying cases I've handled. HOAs need to be reminded that they're not little dictatorships, and I'm glad Judge Palmer and Judge Foster both saw through what they were trying to do. I drove home feeling vindicated. The ordeal was over. The HOA had backed down. My property rights had been affirmed. Everything should have been perfect, except Patricia Sullivan wasn't done yet. The first sign of trouble came 2 weeks after the mediation. I got a letter from the HOA informing me that my annual dues were being increased by $800 to cover legal expenses incurred by the board. The letter, signed by Patricia, explained that because I had caused the HOA to spend money on attorneys and court costs, it was only fair that all homeowners share in that burden. I called Sarah immediately. "Can she do this? Let me look at the CCRs." I heard papers rustling. "Okay, dues increases have to be approved by a vote of the full board and can only be implemented once a year during the annual budget process." "When did you get this letter?" "Today. It says the increase is effective immediately." "That's improper. The annual budget meeting isn't until November." "She's trying to retaliate against you by hitting you in the wallet. Forward me that letter." The second sign came a week later when I was cited for having my trash cans visible from the street. This was technically true, in that my trash cans were at the side of my house near my driveway, but they'd been there since I moved in 3 years ago without any complaints. Now suddenly, they were a violation requiring immediate correction or a $50 fine. Then I got cited for my lawn being a 1/4 inch too long. Then for parking my car on the street overnight instead of in my garage. Then for having a garden hose visible from the street. Each citation came with its own fine schedule and threatening language about enforcement actions. I documented everything and sent it all to Sarah. After the 6th citation in as many weeks, she filed a motion for sanctions against the HOA for harassment and retaliatory conduct in violation of the settlement agreement. We ended up back in front of Judge Palmer. This time, Patricia came alone without the other board members and looking significantly less confident than she had during our first appearance. "Miss Sullivan," Judge Palmer said after reviewing the motion, "can you explain to me why Mr. Montgomery has received 11 separate citations in the 2 months since you signed a settlement agreement in this case?" "We're simply enforcing our community standards equally across all residents, Your Honor." "Really? Miss Chen, do you have that exhibit we discussed?" Sarah stood and handed a document to the judge, then one to Patricia. "Your Honor, we filed a public records request with the HOA and obtained a list of all citations issued in the past year. As you can see, in the 12 months prior to the dispute with Mr. Montgomery, the HOA issued a total of 47 citations across the entire community of 320 homes. In the 2 months since the settlement, they've issued 11 citations, and all 11 have been against Mr. Montgomery." Judge Palmer looked at Patricia over his glasses. "That's a remarkable coincidence, wouldn't you say? Mr. Montgomery's property has numerous violations that needed to be addressed. His trash cans, which have been in the same location for 3 years, his lawn being a 1/4 of an inch too long, a garden hose. Miss Sullivan, this is textbook retaliation, and I won't allow it in my courtroom." "Your Honor, I'm simply doing my job as HOA president. Your job is to fairly enforce the rules, not to harass a homeowner because he stood up for his legal rights. Here's what's going to happen. All 11 citations are dismissed. All fines are voided. The improper dues increase you tried to impose on Mr. Montgomery is also voided. Furthermore, I'm issuing an order that the HOA cannot cite Mr. Montgomery for any violations unless those same violations are being enforced against other homeowners in the community. If Mr. Montgomery's trash cans are visible, you need to show that you're citing other homeowners with visible trash cans. If his lawn is too long, You need to show that you're measuring everyone's lawns equally. Your Honor, that's an impossible standard. No, it's called equal enforcement, and it's what you're legally required to do anyway. I'm also granting Mr. Montgomery's request for attorney's fees. The HOA will pay Miss Chen's fees for having to bring this motion. Patricia's face went pale. How much, Miss Chen? What are your fees for this matter? $4,200, Your Honor. The HOA will pay that amount within 30 days. Is there anything else, Miss Chen? Just one thing, Your Honor. We'd like the court to appoint a special monitor to oversee HOA actions regarding Mr. Montgomery for the next 12 months to ensure compliance with today's order. Granted. I'll have my clerk identify an appropriate monitor. Miss Sullivan, you understand this order? Yes, Your Honor, she said quietly. Then we're done here. And Miss Sullivan, if I see you in my courtroom again because you're continuing to harass this man, the consequences will be much more severe. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor. We walked out of the courthouse, and Sarah was practically glowing. That was perfect. Judge Palmer just put a leash on her, and there's nothing she can do about it. What happens now? Now the monitor will review any citations the HOA tries to give you, and they'll have to justify that they're treating you the same as everyone else. Patricia's hands are completely tied. And the attorney's fees are going to come out of the HOA's budget, which means the other homeowners are going to start asking questions about why their dues are being spent on losing court cases. Sarah was right about that last part. Within a week of the hearing, I received an email from Dennis Crawford asking if we could meet for coffee. We met at a Starbucks near the neighborhood, and he looked exhausted. Nathan, I owe you an apology, he said. The board should never have gone along with Patricia on this whole thing. We got caught up in her conviction that she was right, and we didn't ask enough questions. I appreciate you speaking up during the mediation, I said. That was the least I could do. Look, there's going to be a special election for HOA president. Margaret, Robert, and I are calling for it. Patricia has cost the association over $15,000 in legal fees on a case we never should have brought. Homeowners are furious, and they're demanding accountability. When's the election? 3 weeks from now. I'm running for president, and my entire platform is basically I'm not Patricia Sullivan, and I won't waste your money on stupid lawsuits. I'm hoping to bring some sanity back to the board. You've got my vote, I said. The election was held on a Tuesday evening in the community clubhouse. I attended, curious to see how it would play out. The room was packed with homeowners, most of whom I'd never met. Patricia gave a speech defending her record and arguing that she'd been trying to protect property values and community standards. Dennis gave a speech about fiscal responsibility and treating homeowners with respect. The vote wasn't even close. Dennis won with 73% of the vote. Patricia lost her position as president and also her seat on the board, as 2 other candidates ran against her and split the vote for her to even remain as a regular member. After the results were announced, Patricia gathered her things and left without speaking to anyone. I almost felt sorry for her, but then I remembered the stress she'd put me through, the legal fees I'd had to pay, and the principle of what she'd tried to do. Dennis came over to shake my hand. New regime starts now. I promise you won't have any more problems with the HOA. I'll hold you to that, I said, and he kept his word. In the months that followed, I never received another citation. My storage building continued to sit peacefully in the corner of my yard, full of tools and wood and sawdust, completely undisturbed by HOA demands. The monitor that Judge Palmer had appointed checked in every few weeks, but there was never anything to report. The story should probably end there, with everything resolved and everyone moving on with their lives. But about 6 months after Dennis took over as HOA president, I got a call from Detective Lisa Ramirez with the Phoenix Police Department. "Mr. Montgomery, I'm calling about Patricia Sullivan. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" My stomach dropped. "What about her?" "We're investigating allegations of financial fraud related to her time as HOA president. Your name came up in our investigation, and I was hoping you could answer some questions." We met at the police station downtown. Detective Ramirez was in her 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and sharp, intelligent eyes. She led me to an interview room and offered me coffee, which I declined. "What's this about?" I asked. "The new HOA board hired a forensic accountant to review the association's finances. They found some irregularities in the budget from Patricia Sullivan's time as president. Specifically, they found that she'd been submitting invoices for legal services that were significantly inflated." "Inflated how?" "The attorney who represented the HOA in your case, Mr. Harrison, billed for specific amounts, but the invoices that Patricia submitted to the board for approval were 30 to 40% higher than what the attorney actually charged. She was pocketing the difference." I sat back in my chair. "How much are we talking about?" "So far, we've identified about $47,000 over 2 years. That includes the legal fees from your case, but also from other disputes and routine legal work." She'd take a $3,000 invoice and turn it into a $4,000 invoice, then deposit the difference into her personal account. "That's embezzlement." "Yes, it is. We're building a case against her, and the HOA will be filing a civil suit as well to recover the money. I'm talking to everyone who was involved in cases that generated legal fees during her tenure. Can you tell me what you remember about the bills you saw?" I told her everything I could remember, which wasn't much since I'd never seen the actual invoices the HOA received. But I gave her all my documentation from the case, including every letter and notice Patricia had sent me, and I confirmed the timeline of events. "This is helpful," Detective Ramirez said. "It shows her pattern of aggressive enforcement actions that generated legal fees she could then inflate and skim from. So she was starting fights just to create billing. That's our theory. It wasn't just you. We've identified 3 other homeowners who went through similar disputes with her, all of which resulted in legal fees that she inflated and embezzled. That's insane. It's criminal. Grand theft, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. We're planning to arrest her next week once we've finished documenting everything." I left the police station feeling strange. I'd wanted Patricia to face consequences for what she'd done to me, but I hadn't expected it to end with criminal charges. At the same time, if she'd really been stealing from the HOA, then she deserved whatever happened to her. The arrest happened on a Thursday morning. I know because it made the local news. Patricia Sullivan, former president of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA, was arrested on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and theft. The news report showed her being led out of her house in handcuffs, looking significantly less confident than she had during our courtroom battles. The case moved through the courts over the following months. Patricia initially pleaded not guilty, but eventually took a plea deal when the evidence against her became overwhelming. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution of $47,000 to the HOA. Dennis Crawford sent an email to all homeowners explaining what had happened, apologizing on behalf of the board, and outlining new financial controls that would prevent any future embezzlement. He also mentioned that the HOA's insurance would cover most of the stolen money, so there wouldn't be a special assessment against homeowners. I ran into Dennis at the grocery store a few weeks after Patricia's sentencing. "Can you believe it?" he said. She was stealing from us the whole time. It explains why she was so aggressive about creating legal disputes, I said. Every fight meant more legal bills she could inflate. The forensic accountant said your case generated almost $8,000 in real legal fees, but Patricia billed the HOA for $11,000. She pocketed $3,000 just from harassing you about your storage building. I shook my head. At least it's over now. Completely over. And I promise you the new board is running things by the book. We're not looking for fights. We're just trying to maintain the neighborhood without making everyone miserable. That's all anyone wants, I said. Life settled back into a comfortable routine after that. I continued with my woodworking hobby in my storage building, the one that Patricia had been so desperate to access. I built a new dining table for my house, then some bookshelves, then a bed frame. None of my neighbors complained about noise or sawdust. The HOA left me alone. The monitor that Judge Palmer had appointed eventually stopped checking in because there was nothing to monitor. About a year after everything ended, I got a call from Sarah Chen. "I'm working on an article for a legal journal about HOA overreach," she said. "Would you be willing to let me use your case as an example? What would that involve?" "Just letting me write about what happened. Using your real name unless you'd prefer I didn't. I want to highlight how HOAs sometimes exceed their authority and what homeowners can do about it. Your case is perfect because it shows the full spectrum from illegal demands to retaliation to criminal conduct." "Sure, go ahead. If it helps other people deal with their HOAs, I'm all for it." The article came out a few months later in the Arizona Property Law Review. Sarah sent me a copy. It was titled, "When HOA Enforcement Becomes Harassment, Property Rights and the Limits of Covenant Authority." She'd done a good job laying out the legal issues and using my case to illustrate what can go wrong when HOA boards forget that they serve homeowners rather than rule over them. I framed the article and hung it in my storage building, right above my workbench. It seemed appropriate somehow. This whole thing had started because of this building, and now it ended with a legal article explaining why Patricia Sullivan had been wrong from the very beginning. Tom Brennan, my neighbor who had called to warn me when Patricia showed up with bolt cutters, came over one Saturday while I was working on a new project. I was building a small bookcase for my niece who was starting college. "That looks great," Tom said, examining my work. "You know, I never believed Patricia's nonsense about you running a business out of here. I've always known you just do this for fun. Did you ever file one of those anonymous complaints she talked about?" "Never. I don't think anyone did. I think she made them all up just to justify what she was trying to do." "That wouldn't surprise me. Nothing about her turned out to be honest." Tom leaned against my workbench. "I'm glad you fought back against her, Nathan. A lot of people would have just given her the keys and let her walk all over them." "It was the principle of the thing," I said. "She didn't have the right to demand access to my property, and I wasn't going to pretend she did just to make my life easier." "Well, you made everyone's life easier in the long run. Dennis has been a great president, and the HOA actually functions like it's supposed to now instead of being Patricia's personal fiefdom." We talked for a while longer, then Tom headed home and I went back to work on the bookcase. The sun was setting over the Phoenix Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. My storage building was quiet except for the sound of my sandpaper smoothing wood grain. Everything was exactly as it should be, and I had fought to keep it that way. The legal battle had cost me time and money and stress, but it had been worth it. Not just because I won, but because I had stood up for my rights when someone tried to take them away. Property rights matter. Privacy matters. The rule of law matters. And sometimes you have to fight to protect those things, even when it would be easier to just give in. I finished the bookcase as the last light faded from the sky. It wasn't my best work, but it was solid and functional and made with care. I'd give it to my niece next weekend when I drove down to Tucson to help her move into her dorm room. She'd use it to hold her textbooks and photos and all the small treasures that make a space feel like home. That's what I'd been fighting for all along, really. The right to have a space that was mine, to use it as I saw fit, to keep my private things private. Patricia Sullivan had tried to take that away from me, but she'd failed. The law had been on my side, I'd had a good attorney, and I'd been willing to stand my ground. As I locked up the storage building and headed back to my house, I thought about how different things might have been if I'd just given Patricia those keys. She probably would have found some trivial violation to cite me for, or she would have made up some new rule that I was breaking. The harassment would have continued, maybe even gotten worse, and she'd still be embezzling money from the HOA, stealing from the neighbors I'd lived among for years. By fighting back, I hadn't just protected myself. I'd exposed corruption and helped replace a bad board with a good one. The whole neighborhood was better off because I'd refused to back down. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen. Saw on the news that Patricia was transferred to a state facility in Florence. Just thought you'd want to know it's really over. I texted back a thank you and went inside my house. It was really over. Patricia was in prison serving her sentence. The HOA was functioning properly under new leadership. My storage building stood undisturbed in the corner of my yard, full of tools and sawdust and the quiet satisfaction of work done well. I poured myself a beer and sat on my back patio, looking at that building in the twilight. It was just a metal structure, 12 by 16 feet, painted brown to match my house. There was nothing special about it except that it was mine, and I'd fought to keep it that way. The next morning, Sunday, I slept in late and made a big breakfast. I was planning to spend the afternoon working on another project in my storage building, maybe start on the bed frame I'd been designing. It was a beautiful day in Phoenix, sunny but not too hot, perfect for working with the big door open and music playing from my phone. As I was finishing my coffee, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a young couple I didn't recognize standing on my porch. "Hi," the woman said. "I'm sorry to bother you, but we're thinking about buying a house in this neighborhood. The realtor mentioned that you'd had some problems with the HOA, and we wanted to ask you about it before we made an offer." I invited them in and told them the whole story, not holding anything back. When I finished, the husband looked relieved. "So the person who caused all the problems is gone, and there's new leadership now." "Exactly. The HOA is actually pretty reasonable these days. They maintain the common areas, handle basic community issues, and don't harass homeowners about stupid things." "That's good to hear," the wife said. "We love the house we're looking at, but we were worried about the HOA situation." "Every HOA is different," I said. "But this one is in good hands now. Just make sure you read the CCRs carefully before you buy, so you know exactly what rules you're agreeing to follow." They thanked me and left, and I thought about how strange it was to be giving HOA advice to potential neighbors. A year ago, I'd been on the verge of selling my house just to get away from Patricia Sullivan's harassment. Now I was encouraging people to move in because things had gotten better. That evening, I got an email from Margaret Chen, the HOA treasurer. The board was planning a community barbecue in the neighborhood park to celebrate the association's 30th anniversary, and they wanted to know if I'd be willing to man one of the grills. I wrote back that I'd be happy to help. The barbecue happened 3 weeks later on a Saturday afternoon. It was one of those perfect Arizona autumn days when the summer heat has finally broken, and the temperature is just right for being outside. About 100 people showed up. Neighbors I knew and neighbors I'd never met, all gathering in the park to eat burgers and hot dogs and talk about nothing in particular. Dennis Crawford gave a short speech thanking everyone for their support during what he diplomatically called a challenging transition period for the board. He talked about the new financial controls, the improved communication with homeowners, and his vision for an HOA that served the community rather than burdening it. People applauded. And then we all went back to eating and talking. Tom Brennan came over to where I was manning the grill. "Nice turnout," he said. "Better than I expected. I didn't realize this many people actually cared about the HOA. They care now, after everything that happened. Patricia's embezzlement was a wake-up call for a lot of folks. They realized they'd been ignoring the HOA for years and letting her do whatever she wanted. A woman I didn't know approached us. 'Are you Nathan Montgomery?' 'That's me.' 'I just wanted to say thank you. I'm Linda Peterson. I live on Sycamore Drive. Patricia tried to fine me 2 years ago because my mailbox was the wrong shade of black. She wanted $300 and threatened to put a lien on my house. I ended up repainting the mailbox just to make her go away, but I always regretted not fighting her on it." "I'm sorry that happened to you," I said. "Don't be. Your case gave a lot of us courage to start standing up for ourselves. When Dennis called for the special election, I volunteered for his campaign. I've never been involved in HOA politics before, but I wanted to help make sure someone like Patricia never got power again." We talked for a few more minutes, and then she drifted off to join another conversation. But over the course of the afternoon, 3 more people came up to tell me similar stories. Patricia had harassed them about various minor issues, and they'd all felt powerless to stop her until my case showed them that the HOA's authority wasn't unlimited. I hadn't expected to become some kind of symbol of resistance against HOA overreach, but apparently that's what had happened. It felt strange and a little uncomfortable, but also good in a way. If my fight had helped other people stand up for their rights, then all the stress and legal fees had been worth even more than I'd thought. As the sun set and the barbecue wound down, I helped Dennis and some other volunteers clean up the park. We loaded trash bags into a truck, broke down folding tables, and swept the pavilion area. It was simple, physical work, and it felt good to be contributing to the community in a normal, uncomplicated way. "Thanks for your help today," Dennis said as we finished up. "And thanks for everything else too. I know it wasn't easy going through all that with Patricia." "It was the right thing to do," I said. "Still, a lot of people would have just paid her off and moved on. You held the line and it made a difference." We shook hands and I drove home as the last light faded from the sky. My house was dark and quiet, and my storage building sat peacefully in the backyard where it had always been. I unlocked it and stood in the doorway, breathing in the familiar smell of wood and oil and metal. This was my space. I had built things here, created things here, found satisfaction in the simple process of working with my hands. Patricia Sullivan had tried to take it away from me, tried to violate my privacy and assert authority she didn't have. But she'd failed. The law had protected me. Good attorneys had helped me. And a judge who understood property rights had ruled in my favor. The system had worked, which was both reassuring and a little surprising. I'd grown up hearing about how the little guy never wins against institutions and organizations, how fighting back is pointless because they have more money and more lawyers and more time. But that wasn't what happened here. I'd won because I was right, and because I'd been willing to fight for what was right. I turned off the light in my storage building and locked it up for the night. Tomorrow I'd come back and work on another project, and the day after that, and the day after that. For as long as I owned this house and this land, I'd have this space to work and create and be left alone. That's all I'd ever wanted, and now I had it. The moon was rising over the mountains as I walked back to my house. Somewhere across town, Patricia Sullivan was sitting in a prison cell, paying for her crimes. The HOA she'd tried to turn into her personal kingdom was now being run by people who understood that they served homeowners rather than ruled them. And I was home, on my property, secure in my rights and at peace with how everything had turned out. It had been a long journey from that Saturday morning when Patricia showed up demanding my keys to this quiet evening when everything was finally settled. There had been stress and confrontation and courtroom battles and unexpected twists, but in the end, justice had prevailed. The law had protected property rights, and one homeowner's refusal to back down had helped make an entire neighborhood better. I sat on my back patio for a while, drinking a beer and looking at the stars. Life was good. My rights were secure. And my storage building stood undisturbed in the corner of my yard, a monument to the importance of standing your ground when someone tries to take what's yours.